Welcome to our JSON review. So in this lesson, we're going to be doing an overview of JSON, what it is, and this is going to really help you understand and better understand JSON for the upcoming lessons. We just saw how JSON can be brought into JavaScript. And although it's very similar, it's been extended from JavaScript, so it's not entirely the same. And there are some differences. So when you're saving a JSON file, you're saving it as .json, whereas JavaScript is .js. JSON, just like JavaScript objects, they do start with those curly brackets. And if you have a name and a value, they're always separated by a colon. And if you have more than one pair, it's separated by a comma. So that's what they have in common. So those three things they do have in common. There's different ways to present the key name values. So it's always presented in a pair. There's always a name, colon, value. Objects are also separated. So just as we saw that we've got the name, value, name, value, name, value. So if we have multiple items, we separate it by a common. We could also use arrays. We can have arrays and they can contain multiple values, so we can better structure our content. And we see that the format is always the same, that we have a name and then we have an array. So the array is actually the value. And then within here, we've got additional objects. So we've got a name and a value, name and a value. And notice the double quotes are always around. And that's what you need for JSON, and you don't necessarily need it for JavaScript objects. And what JSON lint does, and we're going to be using this more in the upcoming lessons, is that it essentially makes that code more readable. So the code that we just saw earlier, all of these have been translated and linted out. So we see that we've got name, value, and it's in a more readable format. So that's what we're going to be using JSON lint for, and we are going to be looking at that in more detail. So the data is also structured. So we see that the data is name value pairs, and it's within an object type format, and it is an ordered list of values. So you got to think that an array is an ordered list, and you can use either one of these data structures in order to present your JSON data. You can also use as many levels as needed. So you'll see that in the later part of the course, we're going to have a few levels deep of JSON data. So you don't have to worry about that for now, because we are going to be starting slow and introducing JSON bit by bit. This is what's known as an API. And an API essentially is the communication between different computers. So we've got the browser making an API request to the server. The server does something with that request information and sends it back. So the same idea here is what's going on with your browser. Whenever you browse to a website, the website always makes a request to the server, and the server responds, and that's how you get that website built out. So the same idea is when we're making those AJAX calls, that we're going to be using that data and making those requests in the background. And that is coming up later within the course as well. So there are different data types, and we did see a few of these in action in the last lesson. So I just want to quickly go through all the different options here that we have for data types and how you can present them within your code. So we did see that numbers. So again, that the key always has the quotes around it. So the name or the key has quotes around it, and you can represent a number. So it can be positive, negative. It can also be a decimal point. So you can present fractions within a decimal points. Strings are relatively straightforward. It's just a bunch of characters with quotes around it. Booleans, again, just like the numbers, they don't need quotes around it. So you have an option for true or false. So those are Boolean values. And then arrays. So arrays allow us to present an ordered sequence of values. We use square brackets for arrays, and each one of those values is comma separated, just like the example over here. We also have an object. So this is an unordered collection with key pair values, and they're wrapped with curly brackets. Colons are used to separate the key and the name, and the keys and the strings should always have unique names. So you can have a name out here, but then if you're using additional names within those same sequence, these need to be different. So you can't have name 1 equals 1 and name 1 equals whatever you want it to equal to. because otherwise you won't be able to identify them. So they do need to be unique within the selection. So null is just null. So this is an empty value. You can have a name, and we don't quote around that either. So that allows us to differentiate it from string values. And you can attach these as values within JavaScript as well. And I'll show you how to do that. So there are a lot of different options for the different data types. So JSON is an object. It can be used to describe something. So you can look around the room, and if you see you've got a computer, the computer has some properties. You can easily describe that with JSON. The same thing that maybe you have a chair, you can describe the chair, so you can describe the color and just different things that you can use in order to describe it. And also JSON has what's known as a JSON schema. So this is the JSON schema website. So if I was to place something in here, we can go through what we already have. So we have car1, and mind you, this isn't a great example of JSON. So this is just very simplistic, but I do want to show you what happens when I do something like car1 and car2 blue and I submit it. So the schema actually adds additional properties into it. So we've got an ID, a type, so it's an object, and then we've got properties. So within the properties, we've got the car1 and car2, and then here we've got the type is string, the title is car1 schema, default examples. So it already builds it out into a more complex JSON with more levels. So I did want to introduce that there is more complexity that you can add into your JSON to allow you to have even more information. And we also saw that objects in JavaScript, so in the last lesson we saw that there's a number of ways to pull back information from your JavaScript object. So you can declare it as a variable, and then the curly brackets will indicate that this is a JavaScript object. And you can pull that information back, so you can do myJSON.car black, and then console log that out, and then my JSON card blue. So this is adding into that object. So I want you to actually try this out for yourself. So open up your browser and go to any web page, and we're going to be using the inspect on the console. Move this one down right to the bottom. So by default, I think it docks there to the right-hand side. So you can open up your console, and this is actually where you can start trying out some JavaScript. And this is available in Chrome, but also other browsers. So first of all, you need to declare your object. So we've declared an object called myJSON. And if I type in myJSON, we see that it's a completely blank object. And now we can add content into it. And we are going to be showing you more on this later on. So you could do myJSON car1 and do black. And now if you pull that information back, so if you do the myJSON object, you see you've got the car in there. You can also do myJSON car2, and we'll set this one to blue. And then when you take a look at myJSON, you see you've got both of those values sitting in there. So that's how you can add content to your object in JavaScript. There's also another option as well to add content into JSON. So you can also So just clear that out because the example is there. And you can also create that object, the bracket notation. So this will actually create the same thing that we created earlier. So you can give it a value. And in JavaScript, single quotes, double quotes, they're interchangeable. So that it's actually, if you're doing something that might have a double quote inside of it, then you can quote around it in single quotes. But mind you that with JSON, you do need to always use double quotes. So that is another difference between JSON and JavaScript objects. So the other way to add it, so we could add this one and do blue, and I can update this to be car2. And if we go into the myJSON, you can see that both those values now have been added in. So that's just another way in order to create JavaScript objects, and then you can work with them and you can pull that information back and that data back. And notice as well that with the JavaScript object that we're not quoting around that key value. So pause the video, open up your console, try it out for yourself. Create some JavaScript objects. First you have to declare the variable, and then you can deposit some information into that variable.